The Beatitudes are some of the most powerful and lasting words ever spoken. For 2 millennia, they've inspired poets, prophets, mystics, and revolutionaries. But what do they really mean? How have people throughout history understood these paradoxical blessings? And what might they say to us today? Join Sycamore Creek for an 8-week series exploring how the Beatitudes have been interpreted and lived across the centuries. Ancient words, timeless hope, and a world in need of blessing.
Sister Rosemary Lynch moved to Nevada in the late 1970s and lived there until her death. In Las Vegas, she founded an organization to promote nonviolence called Pace e Bene, which means peace and good in Italian. Now, Pace e Bene was a greeting used by St. Francis many centuries ago, and through that peacemaking organization, Sister Rosemary pursued peace on a national and even an international scale by organizing nonviolent protests against nuclear weapons testing in Nevada. Sister Rosemary was opposed to war and to nuclear weapons and all the harm that nuclear weapon testing has done to people and to our environment. And she protested for peace. On a smaller scale, Sister Rosemary befriended the people working at the nuclear testing site and developed warm relationships with them. Wow, let me repeat that. While protesting what they worked on, Sister Rosemary befriended the people working at the nuclear testing site and developed warm relationships with them. Rosemary Lynch was able to bridge the divide and to see all people as human beings, a quality that gained her admirers on both sides of the issue with which she concerned herself. She was against nuclear weapons testing, and she recognized the humanity of the people working on it, and she loved them. That's peacemaking. In a very different example of peacemaking, we have King Solomon. King Solomon, who we could argue is the greatest king of ancient Israel. Now, King Solomon was known for many things. Maybe you've heard about his incredible wealth. Maybe you heard about his wisdom. Maybe you've heard that he's the king who was responsible for building the temple in Jerusalem. But maybe one of the things you don't know about Solomon is that he's known for peace. He's known for peace. Now, you may not have noticed it before that even his name, Solomon, means peace. I certainly didn't make that connection before I was preparing this message. Now, the Hebrew word for peace is shalom. That's peace. And maybe once I put Solomon on the screen, maybe the connection between Solomon and shalom or peace becomes apparent. Again, Solomon is known for building God's temple in Jerusalem, and the reason why Solomon was able to build that temple and not his equally famous father, David, is because Solomon was a man of peace. You see, David was a warrior, and there was too much blood on his hands to build God's house. Solomon, however, David's son, was a man of peace, and he was the one who instead built the temple. Ancient commentaries have connected Solomon with the beatitude of Jesus about peace. Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." And not only did Solomon bring peace to the nation of Israel, he also built the aforementioned temple that was a symbol of peace between God and God's people. Peace between God and God's people. It's a big deal. And when Jesus is called the son of David, well, it could suggest that he's like David's son, Solomon, the man of shalom, the man of peace. Now, in contrast to Solomon, who you've likely heard about at some point, we have Franciscan Sister Rosemary Lynch. She's not as famous, not as powerful as Solomon, and I'm guessing many of you have never heard of her before I told you about her just now. And Jesus blesses the peacemakers, maybe like Solomon or maybe like Sister Rosemary. And he used a Greek word to describe them. Irene. Irene is the Greek word for the Hebrew word shalom. And, well, it means the absence of conflict, yes, and it means harmony and wholeness. Now, this Greek word for peace, it has lots of different ways that it can be pronounced. It can be Irene, like I said it. It can be Irene, and however you say it. It's translated as peace in English. Now, peace in Greek or in Hebrew is way more than just not being in conflict. It's harmony, it's wholeness, it's mutual flourishing. Where there is shalom, where there is peace, where there's irene, there's also justice. A theme from one of Jesus' earlier Beatitudes. Shalom is a sign of the really real. It's a sign of the reign of God. And in the reign of God, well, there's peace, and there's wholeness, and there's harmony. As Eklund notes, to be peacemakers then means to actively participate with God in ushering in the world of shalom, making whole whatever is broken. I'm going to invite us to pause a moment to reflect on peacemaking. We're going to continue to explore this idea of peacemaking throughout this message, but I'd love to have you start thinking about it because, well, peacemaking is this huge, tough topic, and I have a hard question for you, and if you get it figured out, there's a follow-up question for you to consider. So here's our question for discussion. How would you define peace or peacemaking? That's the big question, and if you have time, what's one way that you are participating in it? Let's take a moment, and let's wrestle with that, and let's discuss it. Today we are continuing in our series, Paradoxical Blessings. We're calling this series Paradoxical Blessings as Jesus holds things in tension in this teaching that don't seem to go together. They're like paradoxes. And this series also continues our series of series looking at the Sermon on the Mount by taking a deep dive into Jesus' introduction to the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes. These are the paradoxical blessings of Jesus. And to, again, help us look at these paradoxical blessings, we're using the Beatitudes Through the Ages, this book by Rebecca Eklund. I've quoted Rebecca Eklund a couple times already, and her book is going to help us to approach the Beatitudes through the lens of the history of Christians and how they've approached the Beatitudes. It's literally a summary of approaches to the Beatitudes through the ages. Now, there are a couple different aspects to consider today as we explore peacemaking. First, we'll look at peace with God, which is, well, it's somewhat self-explanatory, and then we'll look at peace with people. And well, this is much more messy and complex and nuanced. Peace with people involves peace with yourself. It involves peace with ourselves is a huge part of this because, an agitated, violent person can't be at peace with others. And peace with others, it also involves peace with those around us, both those who we encounter regularly and who are part of our daily lives, and, well, those who are far off and maybe people that we'll never even meet in person. But we'll start with peace with God. In the New Testament book of the Bible, peace is described as God's salvation. Now, one of the most famous passages making this connection is from the early missionary of Jesus, Paul, in his letter to the Romans. Paul, therefore, writes that since we are justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ. Peace. Paul teaches us that peacemaking is God's work achieved through Jesus. Now remember, peace is harmony or wholeness, not just the absence of conflict. Now, some of us might be in conflict with God and we need peace with God, absence of conflicts. But God always takes the first step for us. And God is not in conflict with us. We're the problem. And yet, peace is, again, more than conflict. It's harmony and wholeness. And this is what we're all yearning for, isn't it? There are barriers caused by our sin, by our missing the mark, that prevent us from the harmony and wholeness that God wants with us. And peace is achieved through Jesus. At Sycamore Creek, we often use three words to describe this work of Jesus. We say it's forgiveness, it's healing, and freedom. And in each of these words, there's a movement toward harmony and wholeness. Guilt is removed. That's forgiveness. We have areas and decisions where we need the peace of our guilt being removed. Wounded places are healed. We have been wounded and we wound others, and we need healing of those raw, broken places within us. Bonds that tie us down and hold us back are removed. And we fall into bad ruts. We do not do what we want to do, and we need God's help to break free, to truly do what we want to do. Peacemaking is God's work achieved through Jesus. It's God's work. And God always takes the first step of peace with us. If we are to be peacemakers, one of our tasks is to reconcile with God, to receive God's gift of peace. Now, there's a faith component to this receiving for sure. And Our faith is a trust in God that is lived out by our actions. As we'll explore next, peacemaking may begin with God, but it also extends to every part of our lives and how we treat ourselves and others. And this idea that peace is achieved through Jesus is at the heart of the good news of Jesus, the gospel. And thus, peacemakers don't just receive God's gift of peace for themselves. They go and they share it with others. And throughout history, writers have viewed peacemakers as missionaries who are bringing God's peace to others. It's the work of helping other people to also be at peace with God. One of my passions is to share with others what it means to be yourself before God. I love that at Sycamore Creek, we've created a culture where we can be ourselves. We have some characters here at Sycamore Creek, and I include myself right along in that. And that's part of our mission as a church, to be authentic. And authentic, it also means real or true. And what I want to share with others is a faith in Jesus that is real and transformative and life-giving. And I don't usually think that sharing Jesus with others in this way where we can be ourselves is peacemaking, but it is. And I want to help support people in encountering God and becoming at peace with God as they are, their authentic selves before God. And that includes me. I'm so glad that I can be authentic here at Sycamore Creek. Now, it's interesting to note about peacemaking that most interpreters throughout history, until recently, assumed that peace with God is prior to all other forms of peacemaking. So many Christians have thought that only a person at peace with God can treat their fellow humans peaceably or can broker peace between their neighbors. And there's this idea that, we are transformed by the peace of God, and then we go and we transform others. And that's the way it happens. But recently, that has changed because there are problems with this assumption that have been pointed out. You see, Christianity has not always been connected with peace in societies. And I'm sure that right now we wouldn't associate Christianity in the United States with peace. See, God can bring peace to human hearts for sure. And to make an assumption that peace with God produces peace with others, well, it's just that, it's an assumption. And the biggest problem with an assumption is that Christians have, in many ways and in many different circumstances, they've authorized violence and they've destabilized societies, either by turning against other Christians or against those who aren't Christian. So before I wrap up peace with God, let's pause for another chat question about this topic. I mentioned that peace with God is wrapped up with salvation and with the work of Jesus. And we describe at Sycamore Creek that as forgiveness and healing and freedom through Jesus. Now, maybe you've never connected those words before with peace or wholeness or harmony, or maybe you've not made a connection between them and the peace of God or peace with God. I'm going to give you a moment to wrestle with this. So here's our next question for discussion. Our next question for discussion is, what connections can you imagine between forgiveness, healing, or freedom and peace? And bonus points if you can tie it into peace with God. Let's talk about that. So here's where we land regarding peace with God. Peace with God is incredibly important and transformative. And people outside the church have been and are powerful peacemakers. Thank God that God's grace is bigger than just being restricted to Christians, and that God's peace is bigger than just being for followers of Jesus. God can use anyone to bring about peace, which brings us to peace with people. Now, the first aspect of finding peace with people is peace with self. Many Christians throughout the centuries have argued that you can't make peace with others if you're not first at peace with yourself. And that argument leads to a great question. Well, how does one become peaceful? Now, one answer that many ancient interpreters have found is that you become peaceful yourself by practicing all the previous Beatitudes. So all the different things that Jesus talked about. For example, the seeking of justice in the fourth Beatitude leads to the mercy of the fifth Beatitude, as justice is balanced by mercy. And to really have mercy requires purity of heart. That's the sixth Beatitude, to be practiced rightly. And we might summarize this idea about becoming peaceful, like the Dominican author Simon Tugwell, who describes it this way: true peace in ourselves is the product of purity of heart. And without true peace in ourselves, we stand little chance of being peacemakers for anyone else. To have peace with self makes peace not just about our actions, but also about our character. Our character is who we are, both inside and outside. Peace with self makes peace both an inner attitude. It's something we need within us, and it's an action that we work toward with others. Peace is an inner stance that flows into an outward practice. And maybe you can understand how this peace with yourself flows from a peace with God. See, at its best, peace isn't just something that we do, it's part of who we are. Now, one of the things I've received training on as a pastor is to be a differentiated self in the midst of pastoral care situations. Let me explain that. It's helpful for me to recognize that as I care for you, I have my own junk that I'm dealing with. And while my own self and the person before me that I'm caring for, there's a connection there. We're connected. I'm also a separate person with my own experiences and memories and hang-ups. And while I can't be a peace-filled in a pastoral care situation if I don't have some measure of peace internally. Now, I've had the privilege to be with several people as they approach death, and it's a sacred, special thing to be with a person at the end of their life. And I also have my own grief in those situations, both for the person who is dying and the memories that I have of loved ones who come to mind. And if the whole time I'm visiting with someone who is approaching death, I'm focused on my own grief over the death of my own loved one, like whether it was my grandma or my grandpa, my care will not be very effective because I won't have peace. And the answer to this isn't to just ignore or suppress my own grief. I have to recognize my grief, to set it aside in that moment, and then to pick it up, to feel it, and to address it at a later moment. I am able to exhibit peace. It's a part of who I am when I'm a differentiated self who can both care for others and care for myself. Now, the same challenge in pastoral care is also true regarding peace, and that it's really hard to be a peacemaker when I lack any sense of inner peace. I can be a peacekeeper without inner peace, but the bar is way higher for peacemaking. In some sense of inner peace, an attitude or posture that goes a long way toward the actions of peacemaking. One of my recent tricky peacemaking situations involved dog poop. Yes, that's right, dog poop. In August, we had outdoor worship in Potterville, and we found that the neighbors around the church were letting their dogs poop all over the place in the church yard. Now, this became a problem when we wanted to use the yard and not step or sit in a doggy deposit. So we asked the neighbors several times, please pick up after your dogs. Please pick up after your dogs. It didn't happen. We ended up hiring a dog poop cleaner to come and clean up dog poop before our services, and that person still missed a lot of doggy deposits. I was really frustrated by this whole thing, especially when I found out that the only next step that we had in Potterville was to involve the police. I didn't really want to do that. I don't want to call the police on them. So this week I calmed myself down, channeled my inner peace in the midst of my frustration, and I went over to the neighbors yet again, and I explained the situation, and I calmly asked for their help in cleaning up after their dog. And they did it. They went and they cleaned up the churchyard of the doggy deposits, and they promised to do it again in the future. You see, when I don't have inner peace, when I am angry and I am frustrated and I am annoyed, the chances of peace go way down. When I have inner peace, I am much more likely to be a peacemaker. The actions of peacemaking bring us to peace with those who are near. Now, most Christians throughout the centuries have looked at peacemaking with those who are near, like your family and your friends, and they focused on the making part of peacemaking. Well, and that's led to a slew of practical advice on making peace. So here are a few of the suggestions from throughout the past couple thousand years that Christians have had. And just to be clear, I'm not endorsing any of these necessarily, but it's a reminder that people have wrestled with the making of peace for a long time. So peace with those who are near involves being willing to forget things that have been done against you. Now, I might add to this that I might not forget, but maybe remember differently. Peace with those who are near involves refusing to pass along gossip. Peace with those who are near involves making use of the golden talent of silence. Peace with those who are near involves, if you're wrong, confess it instantly to the person you wronged. Peace with those who are near involves don't trust your own judgment while angry. Peace with those who are near involves being willing to listen to sacrifice, to make peace. Peace with those who are near involves don't return evil for evil, but return good for evil. That's a lot of advice, and that's just a small sampling of things that Christians have taught throughout the past 2,000 years. Lots and lots of different ways to make peace. Now, the early missionary for Jesus, Paul, maybe summed up all this practical advice by saying, if it is possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Now, those are good suggestions, and peace is still hard to live out with those who are near to us, especially those who spend lots of time around us. So I'm curious, what practical advice do you have regarding living at peace with those who are near to you? Let's take a moment to hear from each other and whatever practical advice we have to share. Here's our next question for discussion. What has helped you to live at peace with others near to you? Let's take a moment and let's talk about that. When it comes to peace with those near to us, an aspect of peace that followers of Jesus would be wise to take note of is peace with other Christians. And this is a tough one because the body of Christ, which is composed of Christians, is often at war with one another. Christians are fantastic at quarreling with each other, with harming each other. And well, we're going to explore this topic more in our next series based on the book, Loving Disagreement. And we'll get way more into that. But Christians can be downright nasty, can't they, with one another? Maybe some of the harshest things that have ever been said to me have been said to me by other Christians. I'll never forget when I first started in Potterville as a pastor, someone pulled me aside and told me in extremely colorful language that I was incredibly full of myself and shared more about my own life than I did about Jesus. And well, the colorful language didn't do anything to help me receive that criticism well. Matthew wrote, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." Some modern scholars have suggested that Matthew intended this beatitude in the way he quoted Jesus to be for his fellow Christians. He might have written this beatitude as a way to encourage his own community to resolve conflicts with each other, to be peacemakers. And in fitting with this idea, elsewhere in his account of Jesus' life, Matthew records Jesus as saying, "Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." At times, our enemies and those who persecute us, they're fellow Christians. And peacemaking can be difficult work within a congregation of a church, within a denomination, or even among different denominations of Christians. And there is a lengthy history of schisms and wars and accusations of heresy and persecution among Christians. One of the things we've worked on here at Sycamore Creek is to be a church where we're a safe place to explore healing of the wounds that have been caused by other Christians. Many of us carry those wounds, and there are places where we need healing. There are things that we need to unlearn and relearn. And one of the ways we are peacemaking as a church is, well, not to judge or badmouth other churches or other Christians, but to be a safe place here where we are a place where we can explore our areas of woundedness and open those up and allow for healing to happen. Now, Sycamore Creek has worked toward peace in a number of different ways. We've partnered with Resetting the Table to give us tools for discussion amid political differences. We've offered a group on bridging the political divide. We went through a whole series in worship last year on how to have an enemy. And there's still more work to be done. Because the truth is that the body of Christ is fractured and carries wounds from those fractures. We carry those wounds. And now, since no one wants to be seen as a peace breaker, but the practical result really for Christians of defending the truth, and that is often what we think of as purity, the rightness of our cause. We are right. We will pursue that at the expense of peace. We're often so convinced that we are right that we will do anything to get there, even if we harm our fellow Christians. And when Christians have viewed purity as at stake, it's often peace that we're willing to sacrifice. Most often, Christians would rather break peace with one another than risk being in fellowship with other Christians whom they deem to have inadequate or impure doctrines. Maybe Sister Rosemary Lynch is worth mentioning here again because she had warm relationships with the people she vehemently disagreed with. Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." And well, we must ask ourselves as followers of Jesus, how much do we really value peace? Because quite often we are willing to trample all over peace in defense of our beliefs. We're willing to destroy someone else to get what we think is right. Which brings us to our final aspect of peace with others, and that is justice and peace. See, peace and justice go hand in hand. Merely settling disputes is not enough. They must be settled with justice, and justice is making things right. And just like with righteousness, peace and justice are closely associated with one another in both the Old and the New Testament. How we make peace matters. Rebecca Eklund looks at tricky topics like war and conflicts and soldiers and justice, and she concludes sustained reflection on how to make peace through just means is urgently needed today. More and more peacemakers must consider not only how to make peace, but how to create the conditions that make violence less likely, and how to rebuild societies when violence leaves such a wide swath of destruction in its wake, crippling transportation, healthy systems, and education. The world needs more peacemakers. The world needs more peacemakers. Now, is war a part of peace? Can you kill someone else to make peace? What does justice look like amid messy, painful, harm-filled conflicts like we have right now in the Middle East? Peacemaking is messy. Peacemaking is complex, and it's especially true at the national and global level, where peacemaking involves navigating a multitude of competing values and demands. But at its best, peacemaking is the difficult, painstaking process of building peace, of finding ways to resolve injustice in nonviolent ways, and to transform the structural conditions that generate conflict. And this is not easy. I don't have any simple solutions today for how we do this. How do we create justice and peace on a global scale? But I do think this is something important and is worth pursuing as peacemakers. Because combining peacemaking with justice reminds us that what we all really want is a just peace. Peace without justice is not really peace at all. To have peace with God, we have peace with others near and far. And after blessing the peacemakers, Jesus says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." Jesus makes a connection between everything we've been talking about, peace with God, peace with others, and being called children of God. To be a child of someone is to mirror that someone. There's a resemblance there, whether it's physical features or behaviors or mannerisms. I'm missing my son, Drew, right now, who's at Michigan Tech in Houghton. And, well, he's my son, and there's a resemblance that we share in lots of things, like our features and our mannerisms. And so here's the thing about being a peacemaker. When we are peacemakers, we resemble God. We resemble God when we strive for peace now. And we're acknowledged as God's children whenever we succeed at peace. Going back to Sister Rosemary Lynch, she was nonviolent and she devoted her life to peace by opposing nuclear testing. And yet she befriended the people working at the nuclear testing sites and developed warm relationships with them. That's peacemaking. That's resembling God. And we need more of it. Making friends across boundaries, well, it is one of the most urgent peacemaking needs of our time. We need to make friends across religious boundaries in a religiously pluralistic society. Peacemaking with our neighbors is making peace with Hindus and Muslims and other Christians and Buddhists and atheists, agnostics, and on and on. We need to make friends across political boundaries, which that might be even a taller order. Sister Rosemary dedicated her whole life to opposing nuclear weapons, and she sought relationships with those who worked to develop those weapons. The temptation to demonize our opponents is so strong. It takes real courage to see God's image in someone we bitterly disagree with. It takes real courage to see God's image in someone who holds a view that's deeply offensive to us. It takes real courage to see God's image in someone who has harmed us. And peacemaking is reaching out with an offer of friendship rather than a fist. It's not papering over differences. It's not polite ignoring of views that should be challenged or changed. It's not allowing harm to continue, because that's true friendship. And that friendship involves a just peace. Let's go and be a people who join God in the work of peacemaking. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Amen.
Right over your shoulder, it looks like it says Jana with a heart.
It does.
So
Ha! That's amazing. I
we
didn't
totally meant to do that.
I didn't even notice that.
We totally meant to do that.
That's totally Jana. Huh, that's cool. Even spelled right. Wow.